Hello, my friends, and welcome to a new episode of Thursday Thyroid Talks. I am so excited to do this episode because, well, first of all, I haven't done one in a minute and I miss them. I absolutely love talking to other coaches and informing and educating you guys on all things thyroid related because it's a tough battle to be going through. So today I have an amazing guest speaker that I can't wait to bring on, Miss Whitney. And just give me 1 second while we find her here on Instagram Live. Oh, playing with the filters. Here she is. Oh my gosh, I'm trying to turn them off. Hi, all right. Let's get got your request? Yep. It says, hang on. There she is. Hello.
All right. Hi, how's it going?
Good. I'm sorry about the delay. That meditation, it was just so powerful. There was about 60 women of us on, and it was just so juicy and good.
Not a problem. Not a problem. Yeah.
Yeah. So welcome. How's your day going?
It's going great.
Good.
Yeah, getting close to the weekend, that's always nice.
I know, right? You got any fun plans this weekend?
Well, our car recently got stolen and then retrieved, so we have a lot of, just like logistical things to take care of this weekend. But other than that, I'm going to relax.
Wow. So, well, I'm sorry for the stealing part, but yay on the retrieval part.
Right? I know.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, good. Well, shall we dive in?
Absolutely, yeah.
Awesome. Well, why don't we start with your introduction? We've actually never met, so I am honored to meet you, and I can't wait to learn your story. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about your basics of like where you're at, who you are, and then if you wouldn't mind starting at like the beginning of your thyroid journey and what did you go through and put you on the path to become a coach?
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. And I am a functional nutrition health coach. I'm also an acupuncturist. I started my journey back in 1997, really. That's when I was diagnosed with my first autoimmune disease. And then between 97 and 2010, I collected 3 additional autoimmune diseases, one of them being Hashimoto's. So I'm what you call an autoimmune collector, and that's pretty common among women. I see that in my clients a lot. But at the time that I was going through all of this, there wasn't really any kind of like functional medical paradigm at that point. And I come from a very traditional medical family, so I was kind of programmed already to go to specialist after specialist after specialist, and medicine had the answer. But, it just didn't work out that way. I mean, when it comes to autoimmune disease and chronic disease, most of it boils down to symptom management. And I reached a point where a doctor actually said to me, hey, this isn't going to kill you, but you'll die with it. It's going to get worse. We can try and control the pain, but there's nothing else that can be done. You should join a support group. And he was talking about that was my second autoimmune diagnosis, which was interstitial cystitis. Very, very painful bladder autoimmune disease, 24/7 pain. And in that moment, what I heard him telling me was that I could expect a lifetime of pain and misery. And I'm not sure really what happened, but in that moment, everything in my body just rejected it. Said, no, that's not the vision I'm going to invest in. There has to be another way. I'm not going to believe what you just said. And so I left that divinity. Yeah, absolutely. Divine intervention. And I left the office. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I needed to do something different. And that's when I started jumping down different rabbit holes, naturopathic physicians, Chinese medicine, homeopathy, a lot of nutritional therapy, herbal therapy, you name it. I was trying everything. And I did get a lot of relief from acupuncture and Chinese medicine, and I fell in love with the medicine, and so I decided I wanted to go to acupuncture school. I did that, and when I graduated, I found functional diagnostic nutrition certification, and I wanted to do that too because to me it felt like a really good balance. Both types of medicine, functional medicine and Chinese medicine, they are both functional. They're root cause. So one is very ancient with thousands of years of efficacy, and the other is kind of new on the scene, you know. But they balance each other really well. So yeah, that's what I ended up doing, upending my life and changing my career and changing my entire trajectory and applying everything that I was learning to my own health. And spoiler alert, I don't have interstitial cystitis anymore. It's not in my body, right? Hashimoto's is in remission. I was also diagnosed with celiac disease. That is in remission. My gut lining is healthy and vital again. So I now have reached this place where I'm super grateful for the journey, even though, man, that was a long decade plus journey and it was lonely at times. And so now my mission is, hey, you know what? I want to help other women heal and not have to upend their life to do that, right? Not have to jump down rabbit hole after rabbit hole. To have someone who's been where they are and has walked that journey, knows the way to the other side, and can help them get through any obstacles that they encounter along the way.
Wow. Yeah, you are speaking to my soul right now because I feel you so powerfully on that passion right there. But I was thinking at the beginning, I'm like, 1997. I'm like, I was in 10th grade and the internet had just sort of hit the scene. So yeah, we didn't really have the Dr. Google and all the amazing resources back then that you know everyone turns to, that we take for granted almost nowadays. Because when I was diagnosed in 2009, you know, a lot of that already existed, but it really felt like there was still a very limited amount of information. So 1997, you really were like a pioneer forging your own way, you know, and that must have been very lonely. I could only imagine how lonely that must have felt. I felt lonely in like 2000 and, you know, 10 and 11. So yeah, wow. That is truly inspiring that you kept fighting through that. And I love that turning point shift you said, where the doctor was speaking such unhappy, you know, not the way you saw your life going things, and you just no, that is not for me. Absolutely not. Like, not everyone has that voice inside them that speaks back so powerfully. So that really, to me, shows that, you know, number one, you're extremely powerful and courageous, and number two, that's probably was your journey before you may have even realized it, you know?
Right. Right. And you know, I don't mean to like come across as dissing my doctor who said that, because, you know, when you think about it, that was his truth based on his experience and watching his patients with the same disease and the progression, and he was at the top of his game. I mean, he was the head of urology at a teaching college, and, you know, very skilled. So he was just speaking the truth from a particular perspective.
Yeah.
So
no, I didn't feel like it was a diss at all. It was, I know that, you know, doctors tell us the way they feel because that is truly how they feel based on their experiences, but that doesn't mean we have to accept it.
Right. And when I think back to it, I think, God, if he had sugarcoated anything, I might not have had that epiphany moment. right? So very grateful for him just like shooting from the hip and telling me the hard, cold truth as he saw it.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Gave me chills. So you had your complete pivot, your
Yep.
180, and I feel like for me as well, I had a similar pivot, not, not similar in the exact situation, but it was like there was a switch that flipped, and it was like once that switch flipped, there was no going back. And it was just this full-fledged forward empowered, a personal empowerment away from the system that didn't seem to be helping. And so you went through a lot of training. You just dove into, and you found out that Chinese medicine and acupuncture is one of your top favorites, and then becoming a functional practitioner. Yeah, I remember too when the alternative and the functional started becoming like a thing. Like you didn't,
Right.
you're like, what is that? And then I remember the first time I heard that, I was like, oh, so it's a doctor that gives you supplements. That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
That was like my basic understanding back in the day. And I'm like, well, that's cool that they bring both worlds together, because we need supplements, but it's so much deeper than that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So let's, I have a couple questions for you.
Right.
And so the first one that I thought would be fun for us to talk about is, the quick and easy way to make sense of your test results. So I've never heard it put quite quick and easy. And a lot of the women on my Instagram, they will actually say to me, I got my labs back. I don't understand my labs, and I remember feeling that disconnect when I first started getting my labs back too, especially if it's like a full CBC, because it's like 15 pages long and you're going, whoa, what is all this? And I would just literally sit down at the table with like a ruler and go line by line and like look everything up. And I had to educate myself on that, which was so empowering. So how do you empower women for quick and easy lab reading or results?
Yeah, what I focus on are thyroid labs. So yes, it is actually not too difficult to get good at quick and efficient interpretation of your own thyroid lab results, as long as you have some basic understanding of the fundamentals and you're able to recognize what really is a comprehensive lab report and what isn't. What are you missing? What are the missing pieces and what are the blind spots? And then what are those markers actually telling you? So there's a few things you need to remember. Number one is that when someone goes into their doctor typically and says, hey, I've got this laundry list of symptoms. I Googled everything. I think I have a thyroid issue. Can we check my thyroid? The doc says, sure. They do that. And then 9 times out of 10, they say your thyroid's fine. Often what's going on is that they're only looking at one thyroid marker. And what they look at primarily is the signal from the pituitary gland to the thyroid gland, and to see how strong is that signal. And if that signal is quote unquote normal, then they conclude that, hey, everything's right with your thyroid, so your symptoms are related to something else, usually age or stress or some other sort of explanation. But that's not a thyroid hormone. That's a pituitary hormone. It's like a prohormone. It's just the pituitary gland communicating to your thyroid. So when a doctor says everything's normal, the first thing you need to do is say, well, what did we actually check? And if the only thing on your lab report is TSH, you don't have all the information. In fact, you don't have any information about the actual levels of thyroid hormones circulating in your body and getting into your cells.
Okay, so let me clarify before you move on. So
sure.
I want everyone to catch that, okay? So what the TSH is telling you is the feedback, they call it the feedback loop, the negative feedback loop between your pituitary, which is in your mind, in your brain, to your thyroid gland.
Yep.
That's what the TSH is. Okay.
Exactly. It's you can think of it like a manager, like yelling at the employee, work faster, or hey, slow down, right? It's that kind of a thing. It's giving direction to the thyroid gland. Now, sometimes your doc might check your T4 levels plus your TSH. That's a little more information, right? But if all you're seeing is 1 to 3 markers on your thyroid lab, you don't have the information that you need. So that's the first thing, Second thing is standard reference ranges that are used in conventional medicine. They're like these big bell curves. And what's considered normal is everything inside the big bell, right? And then what's considered abnormal are the fringes on the end. Well, those bell curves are really designed to identify end-stage disease, pathology, things that can be diagnosed and treated, right? They're not designed to reflect optimal, healthy function of your thyroid. Mm-hmm. So the reference ranges that conventional doctors are working with are pretty wide. So you can actually have a lot of hypothyroid symptoms and have subclinical low thyroid function, and it still shows up looking normal. So that's the other thing. It's like, okay, those reference ranges are pretty wide, so we really want to adjust the way that we interpret your measurements based on different reference ranges. If you look at functional reference ranges, they're more narrow because they're designed to reflect what is optimal in a healthy population. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I read this article a few years ago that said that in 2015, I forget the institute, forgive me for not knowing the name offhand, but it was something like the Institute of Thyroid or something like this. A big institute came out and declared TSH reference ranges too wide and said, everyone needs to fix this range. All labs, all doctors, this is a medical update. The ranges are being used too wide. It needs to be 0.5 to 2.5. Right. No one listened. They still aren't listening.
Right.
What the heck? So
yeah, well, there's also another study. I can't remember the year it came out, but it determined that it can take 17 to 20 years for the basically the latest research or like medical directives like you're talking about to trickle down to like individual labs and, your doctor's office and things like that. So if we're already operating from a 15 to 20 year lag time, that's a problem.
That's
right?
A huge problem.
Yeah, that's a huge problem.
Yeah. So this is why we always have to teach. This is why I always teach is, okay, your doctor said it's in range, but how do you feel? How do you feel? And so the optimal range, like you were saying, so the range right now, just so everyone knows, is I always forget it's 0.4 or 0.5. It's 0.5 to 4.5. Okay, so that big bell curve you were talking about, that's 0.5 to 4.5.
For TSH.
For TSH, yeah. For that feedback loop from your pituitary, right? Okay. Which is the main marker that all doctors like to use and then gaslight you over. It's frustrating. So they say, okay, if you're in this range, you're fine. Mm-hmm. But like you're saying, the optimal range, the functional medicine optimal range, they look at it as like 0.5 to 2.5.
It's even more narrow than that. It's more like 1 to 2.2 or 1 to 2.5. So it's right. So good. Sometimes you can identify when people are running too low, when even the range you're talking about that was updated is still a little too wide on the low end. Mm-hmm. So it makes a huge difference in terms of how you interpret labs. And the other thing that tends to happen is that, and I see this in my practice all the time when I get my clients thyroid labs that they've had run over the years with their doctors. Rarely are people looking at antibody levels.
Thank you. Let's talk about that.
That's a big deal.
Big deal.
And then also, but there it's kind of like a catch-22 because it's really great when you see that a doctor ran TPO and thyroglobulin antibodies. I'm like, yay, awesome.
Yeah.
But if they're normal just one time, if they fall in that standard normal reference range, the doc will never look at them again. And the problem with that is that antibody levels fluctuate, and up to a third of women may not test with elevated antibodies, even though they have Hashimoto's, right? So what I tell my clients is if you're going to continue to run labs through your doctor, make sure that every time they check your thyroid, they're checking for antibody levels, because just because they were normal 3 months ago doesn't mean they're normal now, right? So you really need a pattern of antibody history in order to assess autoimmune issues.
So just to be clear, why don't you give us a list of what a full panel thyroid blood draw looks like?
Okay. Well, if you want the bells and whistles, if you want everything, TSH, total T3, total T4, free T3, free T4, reverse T3, TPO antibodies, thyroglobulin antibodies, and I always add on vitamin D.
I love that. Always add that on. Yeah. Yes, exactly. So that is the exact full panel that I started, that I wrote down years ago when I would go to the doctors and say, I would like a full panel. This is what I'm expecting.
Yes.
And unless you do that, they will forget 1 or 2 or 5. And because they have a different idea of what a full panel is to you. So that is the number one way to empower yourself in the beginning, in my opinion.
Yeah, write it down and say, this is what I want. You still might come up against some resistance, particularly when it comes to the reverse T3. It's just not a marker that is cared about in conventional medicine. They don't use that. But for some women, it makes a huge difference because your T3 levels can look normal even from a functional standpoint. But if your reverse T3 is really high, they're competing for the same cell receptors to get into your cells and drive your metabolism. And the way I explain it to clients is, it's like, imagine you're in your Porsche, right? And nice little sports car. You want to get down the road. You want to ride the gas most of the time. Your gas is your T3. That goes into your cells and says, okay, let's keep that metabolism rocking and rolling. Let's go down the road. Reverse T3 is the opposite. It's the brakes in your sports car. It says, hey, slow down, danger, danger, danger. We need both. But some women, their metabolism is really riding the brakes. And unless you look at the reverse T3 and you see the ratio between those two hormones, you can't decipher whether or not you're riding the brakes all the time. So again, it's having that whole picture so you can put the pieces of the puzzle together and make some assumptions about what might be going on, what might be triggering everything.
And of course, how to dose and medicate properly as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because in the case of reverse T3, if you're someone, like if you have a chronic illness or you've got a lot of chronic stress in your life and some food sensitivities and gut infections and, like who doesn't have that, right?
Right.
So if you've got all that and your body is converting most of your T4 into reverse T3, then you can throw tons of T4 medication at the problem and you may never get the benefits of your T4 only medication because it's converting it to reverse T3 and slamming on the brakes, right? So you really need all of that data. So not only can you get the right dose, but you can assess, is T4 only medication really the right way for me to go? Or should I be getting actually some actual T3 in there too? Because I have this conversion issue.
Yeah, correct. So I'm like, oh, we could talk about medication, all these other avenues, but I want to focus on the labs and go back to the antibodies because this is a huge one that pretty much, from what I've seen, none of my clients, doctors know to even pull it, and I have to ask them to request it. So why do you find antibodies so important?
Well, So the research tells us that the majority of hypothyroid patients in this country have Hashimoto's. Okay, maybe anywhere up to 90% of hypothyroid diagnoses are actually Hashimoto's, but they go undiagnosed because we don't have that antibody information, right? Mm-hmm. And part of the reason I think why that happens, and this is my opinion, I'm not inside a doctor's brain, but they don't have any medical intervention for elevated antibodies. I mean, if they do run them and your antibodies are really high, what most women hear is, okay, we're going to keep an eye on that. Mm-hmm. But they don't have a pill for that. They don't have a treatment. So diagnosing you with Hashimoto's doesn't really lead to the next best thing that they can do for you, right? It goes nowhere. But in the functional medicine world, it's different because we know if your antibodies are elevated, something's setting that off. It's either gluten and other food sensitivities, or it's opportunistic pathogenic bacteria in the gut. It's chronic viruses. It's heavy metals. It's right. I mean, there are a slew of usual suspects that we would throw into a lineup and go, okay, which one is doing it? And maybe it's a couple of them. Mm-hmm. But we know enough now in functional medicine to say, okay, well, we have to look for what's triggering these antibodies. There's something we can do.
Exactly. Right? And honestly, and from what I've seen, from my own recovery and my own guinea pigging, just like you did, was a lot of the antibodies are being triggered from an high Epstein-Barr infection. Or a Epstein-Barr reactivated infection. Yep. And so I will check my clients' EBV. I have a list that I give my clients when we first start working, but it's a letter to their doctor because we work together with doctors, right? Yeah. So it's like, it's always antibodies, EBV antibodies. And it's just a pattern I've seen of the really, 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 really high thyroid antibodies. The EBV antibodies will be in the 700s, 600s, 700s. It's insane. Yep. Yeah,
I see that too. And I also see gluten antibodies super high. So, and that's even with women who have no symptoms when they eat gluten. It's like, no digestive complaints, nothing that they can pinpoint. They feel fine when they eat gluten. They're pretty sure that they don't have a gluten issue. But when we run the lab work, their gluten antibodies to all the different peptides are just like off the charts. So that's another thing that we see. And even in women who have been gluten-free for a long time, I'll even see that because most women who are gluten-free aren't living in a gluten-free house. So they're still getting these micro exposures. And that can set off a flare of antibodies, but you might not have any symptoms of the actual gluten exposure itself.
Yeah. And I'm sure you see this too in a lot of like chats of, Hypo and Hashimoto group chats and stuff like on Facebook or wherever. But the first, most women that are trying to help themselves, the first step they'll do is cut out gluten. And they're like, I feel so much better. And it's like, of course you do.
Yes, you do. Yeah, of course you do.
Yeah. So that's a really good point too. But I also love what you said is the whole slew of things too is the metal. Oh my gosh, the copper toxicity, the high aluminum, the high arsenic, cadmium, the metal toxicity, mercury. This is a new thing that I'm so glad is coming out because I never heard about it. Did you ever hear about heavy metal toxicity when you were sick? No,
not in the late 90s, early thousands. Nope.
Yeah. It's a new thing that's coming out of how exposed we are to heavy metals and the damage that they do in our bodies. And I, do some particular testing too to find out the levels. And it's just, that has been something for me that's been most shocking personally, is the metal problem that we're all having in the metal exposure. So we could save that for a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, we could.
But so okay, so I love that we talked about the full thyroid panel. I'll list that out in the show notes so that, you know, if you guys need to write it down and take that to your doctor, please do it. And with the antibodies, and stress the antibodies to your doctor no matter what. That is a huge marker. So let's go more into the gluten connection, because I think a lot of people, this is, you know, thankfully it's something that is very trendy in the thyroid community of, oh, you got to cut out gluten, oh, you should cut out dairy, but gluten's always the number one. So let's just break it down to the basics of why cutting out gluten is so important.
Okay. There's 3 reasons. 1, gluten causes a leaky gut in everybody. You don't have to be gluten sensitive. When gluten gets into the gut lining, it raises zonulin levels in the gut, and zonulin is an enzyme that regulates the tight junctions, which are these little gateways between the cells. When zonulin levels go up, those tight junctions, those gateways, get dysregulated. They become, you can think of them as getting stuck in the open position, and there's no gatekeeper and everything's getting through, right? So that's leaky gut, number 1 thing. Second thing is that the lectin of wheat, which is wheat germ agglutinin, it's also really destructive to the gut lining. It itself can cause leaky gut, but it's also really good at getting through the gut lining. And when it does, it can go to practically any tissue in the body. In fact, of all the plant lectins, the wheat lectin is the most destructive because it can dock into cell receptors pretty much anywhere, but it has a real affinity for the thyroid. So it goes to the thyroid gland, it sticks to the thyroid gland, the immune system sees it and goes, you don't belong there, bang, 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 and starts to go after that lectin. And then the surrounding thyroid tissue gets destroyed in the process. That's what's known as autoimmunity by collateral damage. The third reason is because part of the gluten protein has what we call molecular mimicry with thyroid tissue, meaning they look so much alike in protein structure that the immune system makes a mistake. And if it's already on alert because it's identified gluten as a bad guy and it's on patrol and it sees your thyroid tissue, it goes, oh, boom, that's gluten. And it just makes that mistaken identity, and it tags that piece of the thyroid tissue as if it's gluten. So now it's actively going after your thyroid because it thinks it's going after gluten. So that's autoimmunity by molecular mimicry.
Okay, so the molecular, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
The molecular mimicry, do you believe that this goes back to Monsanto changing and the GMOs, what Monsanto's done to the seeds, to the crops, and how they've genetically modified that particular seed, those crops?
Yeah, I don't know if it's I don't know. Because when you think about the gluten protein, it's really big and clunky. And when we break that protein up into all of its little bits and pieces, which are called peptides, you have a lot of different, very specific, small proteins that are more exact, more precise. It's the smaller aspects of the gluten protein that have that molecular mimicry with thyroid tissue. So I don't know if it's just always been there, but maybe it wasn't until gluten became so insidious in the food supply. It's really everywhere. Maybe it has something to do with, was it in the 1930s or 40s when they kind of changed? They came up with a wheat hybrid that increased the yield of wheat, and it actually increased the gluten content of wheat. Maybe that's when it started. Maybe the Monsanto thing was just the icing on the cake that just made the wheels fall off every bus in town. I don't know, right?
Yeah, probably.
I don't know.
Probably a layered. It's probably been layered because it has been getting changed. Because I always just want to go back to 2 generations ago, this wasn't happening. My
Right.
grandma never talked about being gluten
Right.
free, you know, but
Yeah.
it started in the middle of my mom's life, and it
Yeah.
definitely bled into my life, you know. So what did they do to the crops, you know? So yeah, there's been some hybrids and there's been genetically
Mm-hmm.
changing, but regardless of where it came from, because you know we love always knowing the root causes and the backstories to
Right.
everything.
Right.
um it's just a problem. It's a problem
Yeah.
for our bodies. It's a problem. And so we
And
have to.
statistically speaking, anyone with a thyroid issue, whether or not you have Hashimoto's, I mean, unless you want to roll the dice and bet on the fact that you're that one unicorn who can get away with eating gluten and have absolutely no health issues for your thyroid function, it's not a safe bet to make. So that's
Yeah.
why most functional practitioners say that is the first thing you have to do. And and what I usually tell people is, if you're not going to do that, don't waste your money on a bunch of supplements and detoxes and all of these other, you know, quick fixes or even long-term super expensive fixes. If you're still eating gluten, just don't waste your money. Just, you know, you have to do that first critical step. Otherwise, everything else you do is pretty much wasted effort.
Yeah, because there's, you know, the diet is the foundation. That's where
Yes,
your
it
health
is.
begins or
Mm-hmm.
ends, and it's up
Mm-hmm.
to you. Hmm.
Yep.
And the first thing a lot of us have to do is just go through a grieving period that
Yeah.
we're not going
Right.
to be able to eat regular pizza anymore.
Yep.
And then you got to suck it up and realize there's some pretty badass gluten-free pizza out there.
There's
And
some really good stuff.
you're not
Yeah.
going to go without.
Yeah.
When she was sick in 97 and I was sick in 2009, there was nothing.
There
It
was
was soy.
nothing.
Your options were
Mm-hmm.
corn and soy.
Yeah. And that
So
brings us to
now,
the other problem, because gluten has a cross-reactive property to other foods: cow dairy, corn, rice, millet, yeast, oats. All of these foods can potentially cross-react, so your immune system can mistake one for the other. So if you spend tons of effort going gluten-free and getting it out of your house, that's great. But if your immune system is mistaking corn or rice for gluten and you're still consuming those foods, you're not going to feel better. Right? Your health is not going to improve the way you expect it to. And then when that happens, most women end up saying, oh, well, gluten can't be my issue because I went gluten free and it didn't change anything. But when we run the lab work, we find out, oh, you're cross reactive with corn. Oh, you're cross reactive with cow dairy. Those are your other two things that you have to eliminate too. So it's not just about the gluten. There's ripple effects that go out from there.
yeah, and I'm glad you said that. And most people have freak out points right about now because they're like, you're going to take
Yes.
away my cheese too. That's what I always say. You're going to take away my cheese. You're going to take away my dairy. And, you know, we're all very connected to our food. And I love eating too. And
Yeah.
I love that you said that about dairy, because I actually reacted to dairy first. And
Mm-hmm.
then about 2 years after, I realized, holy cow, when I eat, you know, anything dairy based, I had congestion, puffy
Yeah.
eyes, congestion in my throat. I was coughing. It was gross. I did not feel well. I feel like I had a head cold and stuff. And so I cut
Mm-hmm.
that out first, felt better, then started reacting to the gluten. Cut that out, felt better, then started reacting to the corn. Cut that out, felt
Yeah.
better, then started
Yeah.
reacting, you know. And so um okay, so just so everyone knows, so you're not like, holy cow, I have to eliminate all these foods and go and freak out.
Mm-hmm.
Two things to this, okay? There's two important things that I've learned about this. Number one, yes, gluten and dairy are probably going to be something you have to say goodbye to forever, but there are fantastic alternatives nowadays.
Yeah.
Fantastic alternatives. I still eat
Yeah.
cheese. I still eat nachos. I still eat pizza. I still enjoy almond milk and coconut milk, and I eat ice cream, you know, like I do not feel like I'm in lack, period, at all.
Right.
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 And number
Yeah.
two is, some of the problems with the reactions is because your stomach's messed up and you have low stomach acids, low stomach blends, and you can actually work on fixing those and bring some foods back. So
yeah, some things we can bring back. And
mhm.
also, you know, eliminating all of those things can be super stressful. So I don't ever want to tell anyone from the get-go, oh yeah, you got to get rid of all of those cross-reactive foods. No, let's test you. There are really good peptide-based tests that we can run, and we can see, okay, is corn okay for your immune system? Is cow dairy okay? Is rice okay? We can take a look at that. So you don't have to just go through this whole restrictive elimination diet. You can actually get the data that's specific to you so you can make the right choices for your immune system. And also, when it comes to dairy, just because you might have to give up cow dairy doesn't mean you're going to have to give up goat dairy. I still eat goat cheese,
Yeah.
sheep cheese,
Mhm.
and my immune system is fine with that, right?
Mhm.
So there is life after cow dairy, for sure.
Thank you. There's lots of life after cow
Yeah.
dairy.
Yeah.
Like, have you had cashew based ice cream from So Delicious?
Oh yeah.
It's divine. Honestly, I think it's more creamy
Yep.
and more amazing than like regular ice cream, personally. So
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Cashew ice cream's good. Yeah.
Yeah, seriously good. So yeah, thank you for saying that. There is a lot of things, a lot of ways to test yourself and find the answers without
Mhm.
going through all the miserable eliminations and feeling like all you can eat is a banana. If you know,
Right.
yeah. So,
Right. Yeah.
all right. I was just checking the time. Cool. So, let's move on to, like you were saying earlier, that a lot of women that are diagnosed with hypo are actually Hashis, but the antibodies aren't checked, and there's some real disconnect there in the
Yeah.
mainstream system. So let's talk a little bit more about that, because I'll actually have people say, and they're confused. Well, I have hypo, but I think I have Hashis. I don't know, and like there's still a disconnect between like what are the differences and
Yeah.
how can I tell? And so let's just dive into that a little more.
Sure. Well, technically, hypothyroidism is just low thyroid hormone, downregulated thyroid function. The most common reasons for that are nutrient deficiencies, right? Chronic stress, like so dysregulation of your hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, the adrenal system, right? If you've been living a life of chronic stress and your adrenals are kind of messed up, well, that has a spillover effect on thyroid function. It can actually interfere with hormone production. It can make it harder for thyroid hormone to get into the cells. So those are things that you can correct. You can correct the nutrient deficiencies, you can correct the adrenal function and kind of restore that, and then the thyroid comes back online. So that's that traditional common construct of hypothyroidism. Hashimoto's is different. Hashimoto's is your immune system is attacking your thyroid gland. It's destroying tissue at an accelerated rate. That is a completely different animal. And what that usually means is that, yeah, there can still be nutrient deficiencies. Yes, there can still be adrenal dysfunction. But deeper than that, and more importantly, there can be these underlying triggers, the leaky gut, the gluten, the heavy metals, the chronic viral infections and parasites and stuff like that, right? Those could be triggering that process. So does it really matter, though, from a clinical standpoint, what the diagnosis is? Well, when I work with clients, even if we don't have a Hashimoto's diagnosis to work from, I develop protocols with the underlying assumption that statistically speaking, chances are they have Hashimoto's. So I'm going to act as if. I'm always going to address supporting and dealing with immune modulation and interfering with certain immune pathways that promote inflammatory responses. I'm always going to behave as if they have Hashimoto's, because if I do that, they have better outcomes, just the way it is. So I don't think there's really, I don't think it's super important that you spend a long time trying to get the right diagnosis. I think what's more important is that you're working with a practitioner that understands the different approach with Hashimoto's and any autoimmune disease rather than your general hypothyroidism, so that they can implement that approach in a full-throated way to increase your chances of healing.
Right. So one of the first thing you said that I really loved, that I need and want people to understand, is the adrenals. So did you hear what she said? Your adrenals are suffering, which bring down the function of your thyroid. Okay?
Yep.
In mainstream rhetoric, it's always just your thyroid is low, just your thyroid is not working. The adrenal factor isn't being brought in.
Right.
But this is something that I'm trying to teach, and I love that you're teaching it too, is that the way I look at it is I'm like, they're best friends. The adrenals and the thyroid, they're besties. And they're holding hands and they're skipping and they work together. But when one goes down, the other goes down.
Yes.
And so you have to restore them simultaneously, or like you said, as you start restoring the adrenals, it'll bump up the thyroid as well. So do you have anything else you want to build on that?
Yeah, just something to remember is that, like we were saying in the beginning, you know, that TSH is that signal from the pituitary to the thyroid. Well, this all starts in the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus sends signals to the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland sends signals to the adrenals and to the thyroid. And if that communication pattern or communication system that's happening on that adrenal tract, if that is in a state of chronic stress where it's pumping out a lot of stress hormones, it down-regulates the communication between the hypothalamus and the pituitary and the thyroid. It just quiets all that noise. And so what that means is your TSH signal goes down. Your thyroid starts to produce less hormones, and your cells become less sensitive to the thyroid hormone. And it's not because there's anything wrong with your thyroid. It's because your adrenal communication system is on high alert, and then all those communicators are screaming so loud, and they're not paying attention over here because that's not the problem right now. They're trying to stay alive. They're in a state of fight or flight chronic stress. So that whole communication system, the HPA and the HPT axis, they're like parallel tracks, right, running right next to each other. Like you said, they're besties. But when one is in overdrive, the other one is kind of just going, okay, well, someone will pay attention to me sometime, right? But not right now, because something's going on over here that's really serious. So they just have that spillover effect. And then what happens when that HPT axis, when the thyroid system kind of goes down, that has now a spillover effect into the adrenals, and it becomes this vicious cycle, this self-perpetuating cycle of dysfunction. So yeah, you have to tug on both of those threads at the same time, the adrenals and the thyroid. Absolutely.
And as you know, it is just normal for everyone to be living in a high state of stress, which causes our adrenals to overpump. And we also, everyone's dealing with a lot of fatigue, so they resort to the caffeine. The caffeine makes the adrenals overpump.
Yeah.
So it's just this constant state, like you said, of the overpumping. So one of my favorite ways that I learned to help support my adrenal gland from that constant state of freak out and overpumping is by using ashwagandha. Yeah. I love ashwagandha. Yeah. It just chills. It chills you out. It just regulates your adrenals. So you're not just like, ah! And I felt a big difference for myself. And I've also seen an improvement on my tests of my adrenal function as well, since I started using ashwagandha as a stress buffer. Yes. And I use it as like a tincture that I just squirt in my mouth a couple of times a day, whether I'm feeling stressed or not, because sometimes we don't realize when our adrenals are just going, you know? Yeah. And I've recommended that to a couple of my friends who have very stressful jobs, and they say the same thing of like, wow, that just helped me feel so much better. Such an
Yeah,
easy little thing.
it is.
Um,
And ashwagandha also promotes the production of T4. So it's good for the thyroid too. So it's
mhm.
great. Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
greater. Mhm.
that's fantastic. Yeah, so okay, I love that breakdown. Thank you for that, like, detailed
Sure.
breakdown between the difference of hypo and Hashis. But I forget the exact way you said it with the Hashimoto's. I want to just clarify this because I feel like there's this fear when people hear my body's attacking myself, my body's attacking my thyroid. It's a very scary thought, which
Mhm.
sets our adrenals, going,
Yeah, yeah,
fight or
yeah.
flight. And so what you said was our body's attacking itself, but you've already stated twice now that there's usually all these underlying reasons why this is happening.
Yeah.
So is it really the verbiage, my body's attacking itself, or is it really attacking all of those underlying reasons that it's going after with the gluten mimicry and all of that?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think it comes from a place of the immune system trying to keep you safe, trying to keep us safe, right? And so, yeah, when these underlying triggers start to disrupt immune system function and become kind of set the immune system on this five alarm fire, track, then yeah, all those mistakes can get made, and the immune system will then start to go after different organs and tissues that look a lot like these triggers, or go after the lectins that are attached to these tissues and organs because they're trying to destroy the lectin. So yeah, it's not like you're being betrayed by your body, though I understand as someone who's been diagnosed with 4 autoimmune diseases, it can certainly feel that way.
Yeah.
But that's not what the body's doing. The body's doing is using all of its resources to trying to keep you safe and healthy and keep you moving forward. It's just that these things that get in the way, like the gluten and the viruses and all of those things,
Mm-hmm.
we're so oblivious to them most of the time. The
Mm-hmm.
immune system kind of knows what's going on,
Mm-hmm.
right? But we're not aware that there's a battle.
Mm-hmm.
So for most women, they're not aware that for a decade there's been a battle raging in their body until they get this diagnosis of, and that's an end stage disease diagnosis. You're not going to get a diagnosis of celiac disease or Hashimoto's until there's enough tissue destruction that the evidence is just, you can't reject that evidence. It's very obvious. So
Yeah.
so that's why functional medicine is so important.
Mm-hmm.
That's why, waiting for diagnosis is really not the best strategy. Let's change the paradigm of how we go about managing our health, and maybe look at our parents and our health history and, our family history, and go, hey, there's all of these things going on in my family. I want my life to be different than that. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to work with a functional nutrition practitioner. I'm going to work with a naturopath. I'm going to work with someone who is grounded in root cause healing and knows how to assess all of those underlying systems, get a baseline, see if there's anything going on that hasn't really manifested in symptoms yet, but I want to catch it before it starts manifesting in symptoms. I mean, that's kind of my dream. I wish that all medicine was like that,
Right?
right?
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Well, you know what? There is a movement right now, and I know that women like you and because I meet a lot of coaches all the time, and there is a movement of women that we're rising up to save the women of this world because the medical system is failing. And everyone is sick and suffering
Yeah.
and just being managed. And women want to get better. They don't
Yeah.
want to feel like crap every day. And they're like,
Yeah.
okay, this isn't working. What else do I do? So
Yeah.
I want to go back to what you said because you struck a chord with me. Because when I was sick for a decade myself, I remember when I heard that diagnosis of autoimmune, my body's attacking itself. When I pulled my MTHFR and saw my gene was mutated, I had all these different things happen. My mom got diagnosed with thyroid, thyroid issues, my aunt, my cousins. It was just felt like this wave going through my life of
Mhm.
everyone having this, and I felt defective. I
Yeah.
felt like my genes were defective. I felt like my family was defective. I felt icky and I hated myself because I was like, I'm just defective, and I'm
Yeah.
doomed. And I remember
Yeah.
that was when I hit my lowest and I gave up hope. And I was like, this is in my family. It's in my genes. I'm faulty. I'm defective. My body betrayed me. I'm done. And I gave up and I was like, okay, fine. Then I'm just going to be sick and I'm going to die. That's that's my genetic disposition, and
Yeah.
it was so freaking depressing.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I love that you said is that there will be things in the tissues that your immune system knows is there, that it's attacking. Like you said, that you don't even know exists. The majority
Mhm.
of women that I test for Epstein-Barr and their antibodies are off the freaking charts. They don't even know they have it. They've never had mono. They
Right.
never, it was like, oh shit, I got this virus in my body. Where did this come from? You could have been born with it or even caught it in daycare as a kid,
Right.
so for me on my personal journey, when I found out I had a serious Epstein-Barr infection and that it was probably in my tissues, and that's what my immune system was fighting at, protecting me, like you said, because
Yeah.
it loves me. It doesn't
That's right.
hate my guts, and my immune system
That's right.
doesn't hate me, and it's not trying to take me down. It actually loves the shit out of me and it wants to protect me. And
Yes.
so that when I finally shifted that perspective, I could let go of that self-hatred that was so
Yeah.
destructive spiritually.
Yeah. It is. And
So
it's also destructive to all of the cells that are trying so hard to do what's best for you, because our thoughts and our feelings communicate directly with every single cell in our body, every tissue. So if we're sending these low frequency vibration thoughts and all of this negativity into our body, it's really hard for those cells to like have the motivation to be on the top of their game. I mean, everything starts to kind of harmonize at that low frequency. And I'm not trying to sound woo woo or anything. I mean, that's the foundation of Chinese medicine. Everything has its own frequency of qi. Liver qi is different than spleen qi, is different than heart qi, and it vibrates at a different frequency, but it's all a symphony. It's all a harmony. And I firmly believe that every cell in our body is listening to everything. It's picking up on everything that we're thinking, everything that we're feeling. So it's really important to, I think, work. But I don't want to make people feel crappy because they feel crappy, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's this tool that you're gonna go through these times of feeling depressed and hopeless, but that's why it's really important to have someone in your corner
yeah,
who's been where you are and can reassure you, reaffirm for you that this too will pass. And there is this glorious future awaiting you. And it's okay if you don't believe right now because I got you. I was really fortunate that I found a naturopathic physician early on in my healing that was just so down with being a part of that vision and to be with me every step of the way. And she was like, hey, I don't know all the answers, but we're going to keep working this and figure this out together. That was so huge for me to have someone like that in my corner. So if you don't have someone like that in your corner, if you're listening and you want that kind of a person, know that we're out there. Okay.
yeah.
And there are plenty of functional practitioners out there. There are naturopathic physicians who are hungry and willing to work with people that want to be on that kind of path. So you don't
Absolutely.
have to be alone.
Absolutely. And that right there is why I started my podcast, Thursday Thyroid Talks,
Mm-hmm.
because I will never forget when I was bedridden, taken out on disability, and I just laid in bed having panic attacks all by myself. I just laid there having panic attacks because my
Yeah.
system was just freaking out.
Yeah.
And I just sobbed because I had no one to talk to. No one. I felt so alone, and women still feel alone.
Yeah.
Right now,
Yep.
they still feel alone. With
Yeah.
all of this connection we have, you think, like, how is that possible? They do. But
Yeah.
I love that you said that. You don't have to feel alone. There are women out there that want to support you and help you.
Yeah.
So we had a question of where are each of you located? Where do you work from?
Mm.
So I'll let you answer that one.
Sure. I'm in Tucson, Arizona, but I work virtually. So my clients are all over the US, and I do a lot of lab testing. Everything is done through the mail. I order everything for my clients. They go to their local labs for blood draws, things like that. I have unlimited Zoom sessions with my clients. I firmly believe that if you're gonna work with a health coach, work with someone who gives as much access as you need. That's one, I think, failing in the health coaching industry is that a lot of programs boil down to so many sessions spaced out at regular intervals. Well, we all know that you can't plan crisis. Anyone with a complicated health issue knows that sometimes you get into your deepest, darkest places, and you're not able to wait a week to talk to your health coach, right? So so I take a really intensive approach with my clients, but long short, you can find me on Whitney Morgan Nutrition on Instagram, on Facebook, on that's where my website is, Whitney Morgan Nutrition. And I work with anyone in the US.
I love that. Yeah, I love
And
that.
where are you?
So I'm in Utah.
Oh, yeah.
I
Great.
just moved 2 weeks ago, so it's weird to say
Wow.
that. So I was in San Diego my whole life. But I just moved to Utah, and I'm so same as you. I work virtually, and yeah, the majority of my clients are all usually in California, which was interesting, but all over the
Mhm.
US. I have a lot of Texas girls too. I love it. So
Great.
yeah, so everything's virtual. Um, I'm you guys obviously see me here on Instagram, but I'm gonna just keep it at what Whitney had to say and leave the spotlight on her because this is her time. So
I
so
think
thank
the
you for your
takeaway is that in this world of connectivity where a lot of us do have these virtual practices, that's just another reason why women don't have to feel alone. Right? It doesn't matter where you live. There's someone somewhere who you can connect with, who you have chemistry with as a practitioner that can be available to you because so many practitioners work on a virtual basis.
Yeah, I mean, definitely COVID brought that in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And which is nice. Yeah, because we all, you're no longer forced to just your local community. Because I
Yeah.
remember living in some towns where I didn't really have great local physicians, and
Right.
the online thing didn't exist then. So
Right.
yeah, this has been a big blessing for moving the health forward for sure.
Absolutely.
So we're going to wrap it up now. Let's end it on an amazing, positive, uplifting message. So if you could say one thing to our beautiful thyroid community, what would you say?
I would say for every woman or man, so we keep saying women, but it's not just women. Find one thing that fills you with joy and make sure you do that every day. Doesn't matter what it is. It could be gardening. It could be playing with your grandchildren. For me, it's dancing. I'm into Argentine tango and other forms of dance. So that's just the way I know I can spontaneously fill my body with joy, just doing that. So find that one thing because those small pockets of joy are so important for your healing journey.
Oh, I love that so much. And I agree 10,000%. Thank you so much. It has been absolutely amazing meeting you. I feel like I
Thank
just gained a
you.
new friend today and
Thank you.
colleague. And
Yeah.
yeah, thank you for this
Yeah.
wonderful talk. Thank you guys all for joining. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your follows. We appreciate you all. And we are both sending you so much love and light. Have a good rest of
Yeah.
your day.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.